One of the things I wanted to say, which I didn't before, was that
You guys are ready.
I think integration, or whatever the proper language is, building communion or whatever, that should be a common goal. We actually do have a common goal as a church, and that's what, in a way, if we can get comprehensive immigration reform, but get beyond the very contentious conversations on immigration reform, building communion as a church, being a church again, is the common goal, I think. But that's what this project hopes to get at. So let me introduce Patricia Zapor, an old friend and colleague from the Catholic News Service, to introduce the speakers in this panel.
Thanks, Don. Like everybody else who's been up today, I want to thank you, but not so much for putting together this panel as for perpetually giving me stories to write. And I've talked to many of you in the room for stories over the years, and trust me, you're going to get quoted today too. Our assignment was to take the issue of immigrant integration and specifically look at it from the status of undocumented immigrants. What can the church be doing? What are we doing? What different levels of things are happening? And we have two of the three scheduled panelists here, and I will get to the third after they have a chance to talk. But they represent two pieces of what is going on within the church to address undocumented immigrants and how the church integrates them in various ways. Dr. Donna Carroll is president of Dominican University. The Catholic universities in particular, but universities all over, are doing a lot of interesting work in helping undocumented immigrants throughout the whole range of their existence. And Vanna is the Division Director of Immigration and Legal Services for Catholic Charities of Dallas. And I've been quoting her as long as I've been quoting anybody. She has been in the trenches for a very long time and is very good at knowing who's doing what and where and why. So, Dr. Carroll, if you would start.
Good afternoon. If you want to get up and jump around and go see the sun and come back, I've been at this podium many a year and I understand that. I'm part of the Chicago contingent, but I will say to begin, I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, so I am construction, tugboats, and mounted cops is a bit of my history. I am not an expert on immigration. Let me say that to begin. I'm a psychologist, so I do have some context within which to empathize with that human story. I really think of myself more as a practitioner seeking justice for my students. And so that's the perspective from which I speak. So let me begin by answering the question that even supportive presidents dodge whenever possible. How much money has your university committed in support of undocumented students? At Dominican University, where we have about 3,500 students, about 2,000 undergrad, we've spent about $3 million over the last 5 years. Likely more if you look back before that. That includes merit scholarships, restricted need-based scholarships, Cincinnati Dominican emergency funds, and some parish assistance. And how exactly have people reacted to the university's investment? It's usually the next immediate question. The Dominican sisters have been very proud, not surprisingly. Parishes have been very encouraging. And while there were some skeptical alumni originally, most now understand and actually applaud the university's stance in the context of our Catholic Dominican mission and the tenets of Catholic social teaching. And no, my advocacy has not affected fundraising. On the contrary. When one of our more conservative donors saw me doing a TV interview about immigration a few years ago, he was so delighted to see the university in the news taking a stand that he immediately funded the tuition of an undocumented student. Just recently, a friend of the university also involved in immigration reform, and Elena knows him, donated $1 million for our students. So let me tell you a little bit about Dominican University so you understand how we got so far out on this limb, as some of my skeptical colleagues describe it. Dominican's history is rooted in immigrant communities, initially the Irish lead miners of the rural Midwest. When on the invitation of Cardinal Mundelein, the sisters moved the college to Illinois in 1922, it was to give the opportunities of higher education to the many, with the understanding that neither wealth, nor age, nor race would be of any advantage or provide any hindrance. Ours was to be, and still is today, an aristocracy of brains and virtue, not one of position and status. Currently, first generation college students represent 57% of Dominican's freshman class. It also helps to know that Dominican is one of 3 private Hispanic serving institutions in the state of Illinois. Currently, our undergraduate college is 40% Latino. The Education Trust ranked Dominican 17th in the country among 1,600 private universities for its Latino student graduation rates. A recently published study by the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICER, indicated that 84% of the undocumented in Illinois are Latino, and more than half of them live in the college suburbs, which is our market. My involvement started with one student on a bicycle in a snowstorm. How else, I learned, could he get to school without a driver's license? One conversation led to another and another. I attended a student panel, I spoke at a rally, I endorsed legislation, I hosted regional gatherings for ICER and the Archdiocese, all at the invitation of Dominican students. And then one day I did a CNN interview on the struggles of undocumented students, and my life changed forever. For me, it is all and always about our students. Their leadership, their courage, their stories. They have risked so much in pursuit of justice and opportunity. How can I not stand in solidarity with them? How can I not accompany them on their journey toward comprehensive immigration reform? It's estimated that currently there are more than 65,000 undocumented students graduating from high school each year. These are young women and men who, but for the circumstance of birth, are just like their classmates, with dreams of college and family and careers. In 2011, as most of you know, Governor Pat Quinn signed into law the Illinois DREAM Act, making Illinois the first state in the country with a private scholarship for undocumented students. Illinois, with Elena's leadership in part, approved temporary driver's licenses for the undocumented in 2013. And then, of course, we all know President Obama's introduction of DACA, providing students with relief from deportation and the authorization to work. But DACA does not confer lawful status. It does not provide access to financial aid, and it doesn't give any status to family members. A reporter called me a few years ago asking why so many student leaders in the Illinois Dreamers movement seem to be attending Dominican University. Word of mouth, truthfully, and I believe it's because we have a campus culture that cares. So what are the lessons learned? First, my students tell me that there are 4 factors that indicate a welcoming campus to dreamers. Number 1, very practically, when and how an institution asks for a social security number. Later is better. Number 2, the structure of financial aid awards with an emphasis on merit scholarships. Number 3, a curriculum and a co-curriculum that recognize their existence. And number 4, enough company and enough space to lay low or to speak up as they choose. DISC, Dominican Immigration Student Coalition, encourages the latter. Other points of service that encourage student success include bilingual admissions counseling, savvy academic advising linked to savvy career guidance, ministry outreach to local parishes, and responsive financial planning. But ultimately, in my opinion, it is a matter of institutional disposition and invention. For instance, I am a big fan of the bartering system when it comes to students paying tuition if there's an issue there. I've been known to have students work in my office all the time. Recently, Dominican introduced summer leadership scholarships to make it possible for undocumented students to participate as orientation leaders and conference coordinators. So, ultimately, what is the bottom line for me, and I believe for many of my colleagues? As a president of a university, you have a choice. You can lead with fear, viewing opportunity as a limited resource, or you can lead with hope and trust that given the right set of circumstances, opportunity multiplies like the loaves and the fishes. The mission of Dominican University and the mission of many Catholic colleges and universities calls us to see that glass as half full. Thank you.
I too would like to thank Donna and everyone at CMS for making this event possible. It's been absolutely enriching all day for me. I promised Donna I would share some examples of some best practices regarding improving integration outcomes among immigrants, but I want to first tell you how I'm here and why I'm here, because I harken back to that story all the time, and I'm so grateful. In 1983, I returned from working with Catholic Relief Services in South America, and I returned to Dallas, Texas, where I grew up, and I found myself just lost in the desert, just painfully lost in the desert. I was there about 4 months and didn't know whether I would ever find another place that I would fit. I was so much a fish out of water. Dallas had changed, and the work that I'd done in South America was so very different. And I think Father Green, the Jesuits, have a saying, I didn't know it at the time, but it now very much applies, in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, ruined for life. And I think my experience working and walking with the poor in South America really, in a sense, ruined me for life, but I'm very grateful for that. Someone finally directed me to a parish in Dallas that was doing some really exciting stuff, but when they identified the parish, I said, are you sure you've got the right parish? It was a parish in South Dallas, which was predominantly, or was almost 100% African American. And this particular parish had had quite a history working in the 50s and the 60s in the civil rights movement in our area. And I again asked, are you sure you got the right parish? And they said, oh no, it's Holy Cross, it's Holy Cross. And Holy Cross Parish, when I started attending in 1983, was in the throes, the entire parish, of discussing whether the parish should formally declare it a sanctuary parish in light of what was happening to Central Americans in the immigration courts and what was happening to Central Americans throughout Central America and the civil wars that were going on there. This parish, which at the time may have had a handful of Mexican Americans who were totally acculturated and spoke English. There was no Spanish Mass at the time whatsoever. This parish very bravely and courageously voted to become a sanctuary parish. It was the first parish in Dallas to do so. And from that time, it's so great to talk at the end of the day because so many great things have been said you can just hearken to. The stories of the Central Americans that we gave shelter to were incredibly powerful in transforming people and converting people throughout the whole North Texas area. I'm so privileged to have been a part of that, and little by little, my depressive situation and frame of mind lifted, And about a year later, I found my job at Catholic Charities, and in May of this year, it will be 29 years of just a wonderful experience, never once not wanting to get up and go to work in the morning. So I just wanted to give that as a backdrop. And that experience at Holy Cross was very important to me as I saw an African American parish study the issue, have home studies about the issue, and very courageously, unanimously vote that this is what we should do. So I think with study, I think with contemplation, and I think if we bring people where they need to be, as Father Green said, we all need to change. And I think that's one of the shortcomings that we face in the integration of our parishes and our Catholic institutions. I want to tell a story. 2 weeks ago on Sunday, I was invited to speak at a parish that I grew up in when I was just a little girl. I took all my sacraments there, Holy Trinity Parish, which today is a very diverse parish, probably has 4 Spanish masses and 3 English masses. The Hispanic community far outnumbers the Anglo community in that parish. And they invited me to come and talk about immigration and the bishop's principles and what was going on. So I said, sure. And they sent me all of these announcements that they were circulating. I saw an ad in the Texas Catholic or diocesan newspaper, and that immigration was going to be discussed and 10 o'clock Sunday morning, blah, blah, blah. And I got to the parish that morning, and I mean, you would have thought, I saw so many signs directing people to where they needed to go for the immigration topic, and my name in big letters, Vanna Slaughter. I mean, you would have thought it was Nora Jones coming, because Nora Jones is our hometown sweetheart, and I love invoking her name, but no, it was Vanna Slaughter. So I get to the room, and it was a crowded room, a lot of people came, but they were all representatives of the English masses. And the organizer told me, gosh, we're disappointed. We're really disappointed. We really thought immigration, such a hot topic, our Spanish mass people would be here, and they weren't. And so I asked the question, I said, well, you know, there's all these signs out here. Did anybody translate the signs? Did anybody translate the announcement? And the answer was no. So no big surprise. But I really think we have to think about changing too. And I was told also at the end of the event that they didn't come because the language barrier. We've got to find a way to overcome the language barrier, someone told me. And every time I sit down to write a grant, I pull out the Census Bureau table S10501, I believe it is. It's the statistics with all the foreign-born information on it, and it changes in our area constantly, so I always pull up the latest version of it. And I've just watched the indicator for speaking a foreign language, a language other than English at home, change for Dallas County over the years, and it's like at 49% now of the population speaks a language other than English in Dallas County at home. So this may sound radical, but my thinking is, why don't we have some requirement in border state areas when the foreign language predominance hits a certain level that the dominant population is encouraged to learn the other language? I mean, I don't see, it sounds radical, but I don't know why we don't have Spanish language ministries in our parishes that have lots of Latino parishioners. I don't get it. And I don't think it's only language. I'm a big believer that language is not the only barrier. When I was in graduate school, I did a program evaluation of Peace Corps volunteers in Ecuador. And we went around and we asked the community residents what factors led to the success or not success of your particular Peace Corps volunteer. And we had a whole long list of things. And language never, ever came up. The ability to speak fluent Spanish was never acknowledged high up on the list. Things like coming into my home for a meal, holding my children, being invited to go to the Peace Corps volunteers' home. All those kinds of things, coming to our events, all of those kinds of things were ranked much higher than just being able to communicate with me in the Spanish language. So I tell that story because I don't think language is the be-all and end-all answer, but I think it would go a long way if we would entertain learning, all of us learning some Spanish. And in Texas, there's just no excuse not to, because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So that's a big frustration that I have. I want to just highlight a couple of programs. I think there may be 10 that Don had asked me to just mention some examples of how we can get out of our silos and really build a big tent and use resources that we may not have internally. So first one I want to talk about is unaccompanied minors. We do legal work with the unaccompanied minors, but unfortunately our division is really very specifically focused on legal services. But we've developed relationships with one of our sister divisions that does counseling, and having seen these kids and their families come and experience so many just terrible transitional issues when the child is released in their custody, we thought they need some help. And so our counseling program is organized very, very informal, nothing psychological or nothing intimidating to people, but just conversation groups where the families, custodians can come with the kids and discuss kinds of how is your transition going and how are you settling in. On DACA, went for a deferred action. Kids, we've acquainted them all with and made a really good relationship with our job placement program. And as soon as they get their work authorization, we make sure that they're aware of our job placement program, that they can go for job counseling. And some of these kids have never written a resume, and they can get assistance in that regard. That's within our own organization. We've also noticed a number of DACAs who have come in. They're very, very young mothers. They have children. Oftentimes they come with their mother, the child's grandmother. And it's been apparent to us that parenting skills are kind of at a minimum in some situations. So we've asked and built an alliance with our maternity and adoption program, who does a lot of parenting classes and a lot of parenting discussions and support groups. And we've sent a number of our DACA young mothers to that program. On worker issues, in the larger context, for many, many years, our program received the Department of Justice grant for anti-discrimination education, and that grant program is no longer around, but we've maintained our participation in the Justice, Safety, and Equality in the Workplace Coalition in Dallas. That includes the Department of Labor, the Mexican Consulate, OSHA, and several other groups that are the American Justice Center. They're very concerned about worker rights, and so we still have that tie and that relationship that we can call on for issues when we encounter workplace problems. Another very odd, I call it a new space for us, there's a local artist in town who's very social justice oriented. He wrote a grant to the Andy Warhol Foundation to do a very interesting, I don't even know how to explain it, I think it's called Public Art, and it's a multimedia project that he carried out with the Andy Warhol money, where he interviewed day laborers at not the organized day labor sites, but the informal day labor sites. And he traced, he got them recorded on audio tape and did just some amazing block cutting visual pieces. And then he goes around and he talks about the experience with some of the day laborers that he encountered. So we formed an alliance with him, and we have told a lot of parishes about his artwork, and he goes and does presentations about what the day laborers in our area are experiencing on the ground. It's called, if you're interested in looking it up, it's kind of different. It's called Las Manos Negras, and you can find information. And then finally, on the funding area, we've been very, very blessed, and I don't know why this has come our way, but very recently we were contacted by the CEO of GameStop Corp, and this is another underscore of how important stories are. This gentleman, who is Catholic, heard a National Public Radio story on the DACAs, and the young man that was interviewed during the interview didn't have the money to pay the filing fee. And this gentleman got very moved by that story. He assigned some of his minions to research what this was all about. Then some of the research they found led to us. He contacted me, asked me to come up with 4 or 5 ideas, and he funded all 5 of them. So right now we have a nice pool of money to help kids pay for the filing fee. He funded us with a gift directly, and he has his public relations division working on a campaign ad that hopefully will be in all DACA stores across the nation if it works. Okay. So I'll stop there and give it back to Pat. Thank you for listening.
So we're going to try to do this a little bit differently here. First, I'll tell you a little bit about the missing panelist, and then we're going to have a conversation because I ask questions, I don't give speeches. Both of my panelists had a lot to say in our conversation over lunch, so I'd like to maybe get a conversation going here, and then we'll extend it to you as well. So take notes of the questions I ask them because you're welcome to answer them as well. Eve Gomes was supposed to be our third panelist. He is a student at the University of Maryland at College Park, who I first became aware of one Sunday a few years ago, 2010, when I'd been out of town or something and missed Mass at my parish, and came back to all sorts of people telling me about the great testimony I'd missed of this young man who was in need of some assistance to avoid being deported. His family, his parents are Bangladeshi and Indian, and both had already been deported. High school graduate, and there was really, he had no more protections. He was out. Ives was supposed to be here today, but he got held up in Arizona. He's now become an activist among the Dreamers. Back in 2010, he was encouraged by a couple of the priests to stand up. After Mass, we'll give you some time after the announcements, and tell your story. And he said that it was the first time. He's a very shy young man. He'd never spoken publicly about his story. He'd sort of kept it hidden. It was kind of an embarrassing situation to be in, that he could be shipped off to a country he hadn't seen since he was an infant. He felt like he had no options, but he came away from that with people in the parish stopping him to say they were praying for him, that yes, I'm calling my member of Congress tomorrow, I will write a letter. To summarize the story, by the end of the summer, he got a call from his lawyer 3 days before he was due to be deported, saying that it worked. He'd been given deferred deportation status. Ives is now a student at the University of Maryland, full-time, where he has been able to attend because after he got his deportation deferred, he became involved in the Dream Activists. Various levels. He's been giving speeches, traveling all over the country. He's not with us today because he went out to a big conference of the Dream Activists in Phoenix, and it was an airline issue. So he got held up, and he was very disappointed that he couldn't be with us today. He went on to help pass the initiative, the voter initiative that passed in the Maryland legislature last year to provide in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants, which had not been available previously in Arizona. So that's his story. And I think it's an interesting combination of what both Vanna and Dr. Carroll are explaining. The role of having grassroots involvement from advocating for individuals, but the role of the personal story. If the people in our parish hadn't recognized this young man who they'd seen grow up among them, maybe they would not have been the ones to stand up and speak. So that's what we're missing with our missing speaker. Hopefully he'll be here for the next one. But right now I'd like to have a conversation. You guys share the microphone there. I think another common element between your two stories is what some people, particularly Cardinal Mahoney in retirement, he has really taken up the cause of educating college students about the need for immigration reform, for assistance programs of various kinds. He told me once, not too long ago, that he was feeling fairly pessimistic about immigration reform passing anytime soon because he thinks it needs to come from below. It needs to take a generation of people who grew up knowing undocumented immigrants as their classmates. It needs to take them being the position of power in society, the ones who are voting, the ones who are calling their members of Congress. He said, I know that sounds pessimistic. Hopefully that is not the way it comes out, but we should start now, working with the students at this level. So how has Dominican and other Catholic universities, I know you're very involved there, how have you taken up the challenge of educating the non-undocumented students and their families about these issues?
This working?
You know, one of the reasons I am optimistic about comprehensive immigration reform is because of the leadership of students. So the first way I would answer your question is that it's students educating students. You know, I mentioned earlier we have a student organization on campus, DISC, and they have worked very effectively, not only with the university to develop the systems and services that students need to participate fully in the institution, but they are aligned through other university organizations across universities and through their parishes with a network of student leaders that is very powerful, very powerful. And they've been very effective in speaking publicly at events and in lobbying legislation and being part of parish and civic events. So this is one of those great examples of universities as learning organizations where we are learning from our students. And when I talked earlier about accompanying our students, at this juncture, I do a lot of talking regionally and nationally about immigration, but I didn't start out in that direction. I started out learning the stories of our students, talking with a parent here or a sibling there, understanding the family dynamic, picking up the phone and calling a donor and asking for a scholarship one by one. And my students taught me. And so I believe that's how this movement, the Dreamers movement, has gained momentum and how it will move us forward.
Yeah, a parallel question for you, Vanna, the same sort of thing. How, knowing the undocumented people in society, how does that make your work easier in trying to get people educated?
Well, on the issue of what Cardinal Moroni is proposing, I think it's very heartening that the DACA generation, we know, we thought we could identify existing DACAs who we helped and have them just spontaneously identify other DACAs who had not yet applied. But what we found out in the process of trying to do that is these kids don't know who is documented and who isn't. They're sort of colorblind to that concept. And school authorities will be able to tell if they have a social or not, but that's still not a perfect indicator. But I think that's very encouraging that these kids, they don't interact with each other identifying their immigration status as anything that they need to know.
Another integration type question. Go back and forth with this. That brings up something I was wondering about later. Does integration work better at a parish level, at a community services level, by ignoring legal status, or except when you have to, or by seeking it out?
I would say by ignoring it, because if it's front and center and people are fixating on it, I think that's counterproductive to really people being honest with each other in their relationships. So I think it's counterproductive. And
Dr. Carroll, at what point does the university need to know? And how many different levels does that implicate?
Yeah. I think there's a balance. We were talking earlier. I mean, one of the things that I've discovered working with our students over time and doing a lot of talking with them and public talking with them is no student is a one-issue student. And we have to work very hard not to exploit our undocumented students on this issue as we are moving forward with immigration reform. Because it is a defining element of their experience, but it is not their whole experience. And there are moments and times, and some of our early dreamers, who once they started to step forward, it became their life. And I don't think that's healthy. It became their life to the substitute of very often focusing on their studies and their and other elements of their life. So I think we have to be supportive, but we have to be balanced in how we help these young men and women developmentally move forward with their life. If they get so absorbed that it becomes an obsession and they lose their balance, that's not healthy either.
You both come from places where you've talked about having very supportive bishops who encourage you in doing all sorts of different work. But you also are both involved nationally with lots of different organizations where that is not necessarily the case. And it may not necessarily be that there's hostility, but ambivalence, other priorities. Can you talk a little bit about the lessons that you've learned or you've picked up that other people are learning from how do you handle Episcopal reluctance, let's put it that way, to support, or even diocesan structure level. It might not even be that the bishop is reluctant, but that the structure isn't, the diocesan structure doesn't care about this issue institutionally.
I do my best to make it into an educational opportunity. The question I think I'm most frequently asked by new board members or people who are just visiting our organization is, how many illegals do you help every year? And I love that question because it gives me an opportunity to explain how little relief there is for people and what the law is about, and questions come up, and it turns into a wonderful opportunity to leave the person with more information than they had when they asked that very naive question.
I think we all have to start by differentiating between what is lack of information and what is arrogance or chauvinism or whatever term you would want whatever lead term you would want to put into that. I have found, and I think I can speak for more and more of my colleague presidents of Catholic universities, that in the context of our mission, we have a moral obligation to speak out on this issue. And the more clarity with which we can speak to the issue, the confidence we have, our ability to locate it in both the Catholic identity and this charism of a particular congregation, and explain it and express it through the lens and the tenets of Catholic social teaching. It is a powerful and persuasive argument that at its best can change opinion, at its most modest it can quiet a negative voice. What excites me as the president of a university is that once upon a time, presidents had the bully pulpit, and we were, that was part of our role. As universities have gotten more complicated and we've gotten more laden down in administrative responsibilities, we speak up less. This is the opportunity for Catholic higher education and for the presidents sitting in seats right now to speak up. I'm in a bit of a privileged position. I'm in my 20th year. I have a track record behind me. I have a Dominican community that is not only behind me, it's around me, and it's, always nudging me forward. That I have not only right on my side, I have coverage at my back. And when you're right on your side and coverage on your back, if you've chosen to be in a position of leadership, it's time to step up. And I think this is the issue.
How about some questions from you, or some answers to the questions we've raised in the back? Father Miscavige.
Hi, Vanna. I don't know if you remember me.
Of course I do. Of course I do.
We all have to share the microphone.
Ford Foundation gave us a 3-year grant to to study the situation of undocumented students at all 28 Jesuit universities and colleges in the United States. And we completed that last year. Just a few of the things that we found, which are relating to what you were talking about. First of all, we found a huge amount of confusion in this faculty staff about undocumented students. A lot of misleading information, a lot of bad information. I mean, it was actually pretty shocking to me that senior people, even at a university, would not even know. Some of them didn't even know the issue at all. And some of them were in admissions, some of them were in financial aid, and it applied to all 28 schools in the United States, except maybe one, which is out in University of Santa Clara, Silicon Valley. But the other thing we found is that there was really two types of undocumented students. There's the ones who have DACA and are sort of inclined to talk out, and they communicate much more readily with their fellow students. And then there's a whole other batch of students who just they just communicate as regular students. You know, they don't raise the legal question at all. And they almost operate in two different worlds, you know, because the DACA out people are going around the country. They join the coalitions, the Connecticut, Alliance of Dreamers and things like that, and they get very involved in speaking out, and we get them to speak out now in terms of on different issues at university. But the other ones you have to protect. You really have to protect, because they mainly feel insecure because of their family, deportation of their mother, their father, or somebody, and that's really what's haunting them. And then the third thing I think I'd say about the whole thing is comprehensive immigration reform is not going to solve all their problems in the undocumented. They're basically first-generation college students, and they have all the problems that a legal first-generation college student has, and can be quite overwhelming in many cases, because they often, you know, their family life is totally different from their school life, and it creates a whole issue for them in the future. I think students, even if they get comprehensive immigration reform, are still going to be struggling with these same issues about their career, about where they're going, what they should take, and they need a lot of career counseling. So thank you. I just wanted to add that to the mix.
Thank you.
People desperately need a break. So please, yes.
Just one additional thing I'd say. I think there's a misnomer of the universe very often in which the undocumented student lives. Most of the undocumented students that I work with are in blended families. So there is a documented member of the family, or in some of the most poignant cases, he or she is the older child. The family moved. The younger siblings have documentation, so that it's DACA is both wonderful and enormously painful, because it sometimes symbolically means leaving mom and dad behind. And so, you know, although my work and my limited understanding is with undocumented students, I've realized that we have to take the big bite of the whole thing, because just working with DACA and the simple process of working with a college student is not resolving it for them or their family, because they live in a complex web of family experiences.
When I get back, we're going to start with this GameStop money and some money that came from the Catholic Family Foundation, a project with a charter school in Dallas called the Williams Preparatory Academy. And it's a STEM academy, and they have a goal of 100%, sending 100% of their seniors to college. And they've already documented the current senior class, but thanks to a gift from them and the GameStop money that we're getting, we're going to start next week documenting, you call it, their junior class, and then kind of work down to the lower grades, getting the families ready for DACA before the child turns 15. But while we were touring the facility, which was just outstanding, wonderful place, the college counselor told me this very disheartening story of the sister of the young man who, he's going to be an ambassador someday, I think, who was giving us the tour of the facility, and that she went to a Midwestern college. I should probably not say the name of it because it's Catholic, but one of her professors at that college just turned everything bad for her. He told her that she would never be able to write like she wants to write because her first language was not English. And it devastated her so much that she had to come home, and everybody did an intervention to try to get her to go back. It was a very sad story, and the counselor there was telling me that we really want them to dream big, but they hear something like that, and like her brother doesn't want to go to doesn't want to leave the state of Texas to go to college, and they really want them to expand their universe and consider things far and wide. But that one experience has kind of permeated this entire charter school, and everybody knows the story.
Any questions? All right, one more. I think you're on your microphone.
Manuel Aliaga from the Archdiocese of Washington. I tend to agree with the comment made by Cardinal Mahoney on the prospects of immigration reform and how the fact that when we have a generation of new leaders that went to school with these kids, maybe things will change. But that makes me wonder about the situation in our Catholic schools. I'm not sure if we've discussed the situation there. I had to step out. But if that were to be the case, leadership in the church would be behind, and those who lead immigration reform would come from a more secular background, and we would just watch them from the sidelines. So that makes me wonder what we are doing in that area. Integration of how can the church be an instrument, a facilitator in integrating immigrants into the U.S. experience, but at the same time, what are we doing integrating immigrants in the Catholic Church, some specific institutions, particularly our Catholic schools? It's just a question that
Thoughts on that, either of you or anybody in the audience? Know of any good examples of Catholic schools, Catholic dioceses that are doing a thoughtful job of integrating undocumented students? Somebody was pointing. No? Okay. All right. I think that sounds like people need a coffee break. Thank you very much, panelists. Vanna,